part of this century, French scientists first purified the extract from the iboga root and called it Ibogaine. Over the years, scientists in Europe and the United States conducted Ibogaine experiments on animals to better understand how it works. And according to these government records, in the 1950s, the CIA funded secret experiments of using Ibogaine on humans at the Federal Narcotics Hospital in Lexington, Kentucky.
In the 1990s, Ibogaine started showing up in news reports as something almost unbelievable. A powerful psychedelic derived from an African plant that people claim could interrupt heroin addiction, sometimes after a single experience. To American audiences, it sounded new. It wasn't, because the United States government had already been giving Ibogaine to people, apparently, nearly 40 years earlier. And the doctor doing it was connected to one of the strangest chapters in American intelligence history. In 1955, Dr. Harris Isbell was running the Addiction Research Center in Lexington, Kentucky. This wasn't exactly your modern clinical research facility. It was housed inside what had originally been called United States Narcotic Farm, part hospital, part prison, where people with drug addictions were confined, treated, and used as research subjects. Sound familiar? The federal government had an extraordinary population available for experimentation, people with extensive histories of drug use, many of them incarcerated, and researchers tested a lot of drugs on them, including LSD, and apparently Ibogaine. According to Isbell's correspondence with the pharmaceutical company Ciba, he gave Ibogaine to 8 black men who had previously been addicted to morphine. The doses ranged from roughly 50 to 300 milligrams. Some subjects experienced what Isbell described as pronounced reactions. And his conclusion? Ibogaine was unquestionably hallucinogenic. He wanted more of it. But here's where the story becomes more complicated. Because Isbell's research operation was also receiving money from the CIA. As you know, if you watch my stuff, in 1953, the CIA launched MK-Ultra, its sprawling secret program investigating drugs, hypnosis, and other techniques that might alter human behavior. One surviving CIA account says the agency took over funding research at Lexington that had originally been supported by the Navy and expanded the mission to include testing known and potential psychotomimetics, drugs capable of profoundly altering perception. Now, Harris Isbell was the principal investigator, so it would be too simple to say the CIA discovered Ibogaine cured addiction in 1955 and buried it. The surviving documents don't prove that. In fact, the men Isbell gave Ibogaine to had already been off morphine for months. He wasn't testing whether Ibogaine could stop active opioid withdrawal. He appears to have been asking a very different question. What does this drug do to the mind? The American government encountered a substance that would later become famous for its potential to interrupt addiction while looking at psychedelics through the Cold War lens of psychosis, interrogation, incapacitation, and behavior modification. They were asking, can this destabilize someone? Can this change behavior? Not, can this heal someone, right? Then, several years later, something happened completely outside the government.
I'm exhausted, I'm going to sleep for a week, and I'm never going to take this drug again. And I got dressed, and I walked out of the house, and that's when I realized that I was not in narcotic withdrawal. And I looked at this large tree in front of me, and I looked at the clouds in the sky, and I realized that for the first time in my life, I was not frightened.
In 1962, a young heroin user in New York named Howard Lotsoff took Ibogaine. He wasn't looking for addiction treatment. But afterward, according to himself, something astonishing happened. His heroin withdrawal was dramatically reduced. So was his craving. Lotsoff eventually became Ibogaine's most relentless advocate, arguing that researchers had overlooked something extraordinary. And yet, instead of it becoming a medication, Ibogaine became illegal. By 1970, Ibogaine was placed into Schedule I under the Controlled Substances Act. Of course, research became harder, the broader psychedelic research world collapsed, and Ibogaine largely disappeared from legitimate American medicine. Which brings us back to these broadcasts.
Ibogaine affects the cerebellum, the part of the brain associated with learnings. Users claim to see their lives appear before them, either inside their eyelids or on the surface they focus upon. This lasts for many hours, but the most astonishing finding is that when they recover afterwards, their cravings for drugs, heroin, cocaine, and even nicotine somehow seem to disappear.
The National Institute on Drug Abuse investigated Ibogaine in the 90s. The FDA even authorized an early clinical study. But the development effort stalled, partly because of politics, partly because of money, and partly because Ibogaine has a very real problem. It can be dangerous. Ibogaine can prolong the heart's QT interval and, under certain circumstances, trigger potentially fatal arrhythmias. There have been deaths associated with its use. That means this isn't a substance people should casually experiment with. If Ibogaine becomes medicine, it requires serious medical screening, cardiac monitoring, and controlled clinical protocols. But that still leaves a remarkable question. Why, 70 years after American researchers first administered it, are we only now seriously investigating what it might be capable of? In 2024, Stanford researchers published an observational study involving 30 special operations veterans with traumatic brain injuries. Most also had PTSD. After receiving magnesium-assisted Ibogaine treatment in Mexico, the group showed striking improvements 1 month later in measures of PTSD, depression, anxiety, and overall functioning. It was a small study. It wasn't randomized. It didn't have a placebo protocol, so it does not prove Ibogaine treats PTSD yet. But the results were strong enough that researchers called for controlled clinical trials. And suddenly we're asking very different questions than the ones being asked in Lexington all those years ago. Not, can we manipulate consciousness, but can changing consciousness actually help repair it?
But the cure itself makes you high. And government researchers wonder if it really cures anything at all. Ibogaine is a psychedelic drug that puts its users on a 3-day trip. It's illegal in the U.S., and no one knows if it really works.
And maybe the strangest thing about these old broadcasts isn't how wrong they look in hindsight, it's how familiar they feel. It's because America has encountered Ibogaine again and again as an African sacrament, a pharmaceutical stimulant, an experimental hallucinogen, a government research chemical, an underground addiction treatment, and then a Schedule I drug, and now maybe formally medicine. The molecule didn't suddenly become interesting. What changed was the questions that we were willing to ask about it. And buried inside that history is a much larger question about psychedelic medicine. How many substances did we abandon because we decided what they were before ever actually finding out what they could do? That's all for me today, folks. Thank you for tuning in. I'm the Hallucinarator. Until next time.